July 20th, 1944. Inside Hitler's Wolfslair headquarters in East Prussia, a briefcase bomb was ticking. The man who placed it there wasn't an Allied agent. He was a decorated German colonel who had decided his loyalty to humanity outweighed his oath to the Führer. This is the true story of Operation Valkyrie and the network of German military officers, intelligence agents, and civilians who risked everything to end the Nazi regime from within. Their courage, their sacrifices, and their ultimate failure reveal a side of World War II history often forgotten. Germans who chose conscience over country and paid the ultimate price for trying to save both. This is the story of the resistance inside the Reich, the men and women who proved that even in the darkest regime, humanity could survive. This story will change how you see Weite. If you want to know the untold story of Germans who fought against Hitler, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Share this incredible true story of courage. Comment, why isn't this taught more in schools? Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg was not born a rebel. He was the product of Prussian military aristocracy, a world of duty, honor, and obedience to authority. His family had served German monarchs for generations. When he joined the Wehrmacht in 1926 at age 19, it seemed the natural continuation of a proud tradition. By 1943, Stauffenberg was a decorated officer who had served with distinction in Poland, France, and North Africa. He was talented, charismatic, and marked for high command. He was also increasingly troubled by what he had witnessed. The turning point came in Tunisia in April 1943. Stauffenberg's unit was strafed by Allied aircraft. Shrapnel tore through his body, costing him his left eye, his right hand, and 2 fingers from his left hand. As he recovered in a Munich hospital, he had time to think about the war, about Germany's trajectory, about what he had seen on the Eastern Front before his African deployment. In Russia, Stauffenberg had witnessed atrocities, mass executions of civilians, Einsatzgruppen death squads following behind the advancing army, villages burned. He had seen orders from the highest command that violated every principle of military honor he had been taught. "This is not warfare," he told his wife Nina during one of her hospital visits, his voice low. "This is extermination. This is evil." Nina, a woman of deep Catholic faith, had been worrying about her husband's reports from the Eastern Front for months. "What will you do?" "I don't know," Stauffenberg admitted, "but I cannot continue serving a regime that does these things and call myself a man of honor." What Stauffenberg didn't know was that he wasn't alone. Across Germany's military and intelligence services, other officers were having similar realizations, and some had already begun organizing. Part 2. The Canaris Network. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was perhaps the most enigmatic figure in the German resistance. As head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, from 1935 to 1944, he held one of the most powerful positions in the Reich. He was also secretly working to undermine it. Canaris was a complex man. He was not initially anti-Nazi. He had supported the regime's early military expansion. But by 1938, he had become convinced that Hitler's aggressive policies would destroy Germany. And unlike many who merely complained privately, Canaris began taking action. His position as intelligence chief gave him unique capabilities. He could warn foreign governments of Hitler's plans, provide false intelligence to Hitler to discourage certain operations, recruit and protect other resistance members within the military, use Abwehr resources to help Jews and political dissidents escape. One of Canaris's key recruits was Hans Oster, his deputy. Oster was more boldly anti-Nazi than his chief. Where Canaris was cautious and subtle, Oster took direct action. In 1939, Oster had even warned the Dutch and Belgian governments of the impending German invasion, though his warnings were not believed. By 1943, the Canaris-Oster network within the Abwehr had grown substantial. It included Major General Hans Oster, Abwehr deputy, coordinated resistance activities; Hans von Donanyi, lawyer and Abwehr officer, documented Nazi crimes; Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Lutheran pastor, used church connections for resistance; Hans Bernd Gisevius, Abwehr officer in Switzerland; Allied liaison; Josef Müller, lawyer, Vatican contact for peace negotiations. This network had been working since 1938 on various plans to remove Hitler from power. They had made contact with British intelligence through Vatican channels. They had warned the Allies of German military plans. They had helped Jews escape through Abwehr recruitment operations that were actually rescue missions. but they had failed to find a way to actually remove Hitler. The Führer was too well protected, too paranoid, too surrounded by fanatic loyalists. They needed someone with access to Hitler, someone willing to act, someone like Klaus von Stauffenberg. Part 3. The recruitment. Stauffenberg's recruitment into the resistance happened gradually in late 1943 and early 1944. His cousin, Lieutenant Colonel Caesar von Hoffaker, was already part of the conspiracy. Through Hoffaker, Stauffenberg was introduced to other officers who shared his concerns. The meetings were careful, coded, paranoid. No one knew who might be a Gestapo informant. Trust had to be built slowly. In January 1944, Stauffenberg met Major General Henning von Tresckow, one of the Resistance's key military leaders. Tresckow had served on the Eastern Front and had witnessed the same atrocities as Stauffenberg. He had been trying to organize Hitler's assassination since 1943. They met in Berlin, in a safe house arranged by the Resistance. Also present were General Friedrich Ulbricht and General Ludwig Beck, the latter a former chief of the General Staff who had resigned in 1938 in protest over Hitler's war plans. "Gentlemen," Beck said, opening the meeting, "let me be direct. We are all here because we recognize that Hitler must be removed from power if Germany is to survive this war. The question is not whether, but how. We've tried several times," Tresckow added, frustration evident in his voice. "In March 1943, we placed a bomb on Hitler's plane. It failed to detonate. In November, we arranged for an officer to wear a suicide vest during a military exhibition Hitler was attending. He backed out at the last moment. The challenge," Ulbricht explained, "is not just killing Hitler. It's what comes after. We need to simultaneously seize control of the government, arrest the SS leadership, make peace with the Allies, and prevent civil war. This requires careful planning and coordination." They outlined their plan, codenamed Operation Valkyrie. Ironically, it was based on an actual Nazi contingency plan, a protocol for the German Reserve Army to seize control in case of civil unrest. The conspirators intended to trigger Valkyrie by claiming the SS had attempted a coup, then use the Reserve Army to arrest SS leaders and take control of Berlin. "But first," Beck said, "we need Hitler dead. Everything else follows from that." Tresckow looked at Stauffenberg. "You've been appointed Chief of Staff to General Frum, commander of the Reserve Army. This gives you regular access to Hitler's briefings. You could be our opportunity." Stauffenberg understood immediately what was being asked. "You want me to kill him?" "We want you to save Germany," Beck corrected. "Killing Hitler is just the first step." Stauffenberg was silent for a long moment. What they were asking was not just treason, it was assassination. It violated his officer's oath, his religious beliefs, every principle of military honor he had been taught. But then he thought of the mass graves in Russia, the burned villages, the orders to execute civilians, the knowledge that every day Hitler remained in power, more innocents died. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But I need to know what happens after." They spent the next 4 hours discussing plans: the military government that would replace Hitler, contact with the Allies for peace negotiations, how to prevent the SS from regaining control. It was detailed, thought out, and desperately hopeful. As Stauffenberg left that night, Tresckow pulled him aside. "What we're doing will likely be seen as treason. History may not judge us kindly, but we act for Germany's soul, not her reputation." "I understand," Stauffenberg replied. "Do you?" Tresckow pressed. "If we succeed, we'll be the officers who stabbed Germany in the back during war. If we fail, we'll be hung as traitors. There's no scenario where we're celebrated as heroes." "I'm not doing this to be a hero," Stauffenberg said quietly. "I'm doing this to stop being a villain." Part 4. The Intelligence Officer's Dilemma. While Stauffenberg prepared for his role in the assassination, another drama was unfolding within the Abwehr. Captain Hermann Maass, an intelligence officer stationed in Brussels, had been gathering evidence of Nazi war crimes for over a year. Maass's position in occupied Belgium gave him access to reports from across the Western Front. What he saw disturbed him profoundly: systematic looting, execution of resistance fighters without trial, deportation of Belgian workers to German factories, and increasingly deportation of Jews to unknown destinations in the East. In early 1944, Maass was contacted by Hans von Dohnanyi from Canaris's office. Dohnanyi explained the Valkyrie plot and asked Maass to coordinate with resistance elements in Belgium and France. If the coup succeeded in Berlin, simultaneous uprisings needed to happen in occupied territories. But Dohnanyi also gave Maass a darker task. "If we fail, if we're all arrested and killed, someone needs to survive to tell the truth. Someone needs to preserve the evidence of what we tried to do, and why. Donani handed Mas a sealed package. These are copies of documents from Abwehr files, orders for mass executions, reports on concentration camp operations, evidence of systematic war crimes. If the coup fails, get these to the Allies. Let history know that Germans tried to stop this. Mas took the package, feeling its weight, both physical and moral. Why me? Because you're stationed outside Germany. If everything collapses, you have a chance to escape. Others don't. Over the following months, Mas continued his work while knowing he might be Germany's documentary conscience. He gathered more evidence, made contact with Belgian resistance groups, and prepared for either triumph or disaster. Part 5. The failed attempts between January and July 1944. Stauffenberg had several opportunities to kill Hitler. Each time, circumstances prevented the assassination. February 11, 1944. Stauffenberg attended a meeting at Berchtesgaden with a bomb in his briefcase. Himmler and Göring were supposed to attend. The conspirators wanted to kill all three leaders simultaneously, but neither Himmler nor Göring came. Stauffenberg left without detonating. March 9, 1944. Another meeting, another bomb in a briefcase. This time, the briefing was cancelled at the last minute. Hitler had changed his schedule unexpectedly. July 6, 1944. Stauffenberg was at Berchtesgaden with explosives, but he couldn't get close enough to Hitler. Security had been increased after an earlier unrelated assassination attempt. July 11, 1944. At the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, Stauffenberg was again ready, but once more Himmler didn't attend. The conspirators wanted both dead to ensure success. Each failure increased the risk of discovery. The Gestapo was already investigating suspicious activities in the military. Time was running out. After the July 11th attempt, the conspirators met in Berlin. The mood was tense. "We can't keep waiting for perfect conditions," Stauffenberg argued. "Every delay risks exposure." "But if we kill only Hitler," another officer objected, "Himmler and the SS might seize control before we can activate Valkyrie. Then we move faster," Stauffenberg insisted. "I kill Hitler, immediately trigger Valkyrie, and we arrest the SS leadership before they can react. Speed over perfection." General Beck agreed. "Stauffenberg is right, we're running out of time. The next opportunity, we take it, regardless of who else is present." The conspirators didn't know how right Beck was about running out of time. The Gestapo investigation was closing in, and one of their number had already been arrested. Year Chapter 2, July 20th, 1944. Part 6. The morning of July 20th, 1944 dawned hot and humid at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's military headquarters deep in the forests of East Prussia. The complex was a maze of bunkers, barracks, and conference rooms, all heavily guarded and surrounded by minefields. Stauffenberg arrived by plane at 10:15 a.m., accompanied by his aide, Lieutenant Werner von Haeften. Both men carried briefcases. Both briefcases contained British-made plastic explosives, each fitted with a chemical timer that would detonate after a 10-minute delay. The conference where Hitler would present the latest Eastern Front situation was scheduled for 12:30 p.m. Stauffenberg had approximately 2 hours to prepare, but almost immediately, things started going wrong. First, Stauffenberg was informed that the meeting had been moved forward to 12:30 p.m., earlier than expected. This gave him less time to arm the explosives. Second, instead of the bunker conference room where meetings were usually held, the conference had been moved to a wooden building with large windows. The bunker was being ventilated. This was significant. In an enclosed concrete bunker, the explosion would be devastating. In an open wooden structure, the blast would be dissipated. Third, Stauffenberg was told he would have only a few minutes to brief Hitler on reserve army status. This meant he needed to place the bomb, leave the room quickly, and hope no one noticed the abandoned briefcase before it exploded. At approximately 12:20 p.m., Stauffenberg excused himself, claiming he needed to wash up and change his shirt. He and Haeften went to a nearby washroom. With his one remaining hand and his three-fingered left hand, Stauffenberg struggled to arm the first explosive. Haeften helped him crush the chemical timer capsule, which would now give them 10 minutes before detonation. They intended to arm both bombs, doubling the explosive power. But someone knocked on the washroom door. "Colonel, they're waiting for you." There was no time. They armed only one bomb, shoved it into Stauffenberg's briefcase, and left the second explosive hidden in Haeften's case. They headed to the conference room. Garciers Part 7. The Explosion. At 12:37 p.m., Stauffenberg entered the conference room. The meeting was already in progress. Hitler stood at the center of a large oak table studying maps of the Eastern Front. Around him were approximately 20 officers and aides. Colonel Heinz Brandt, standing next to Hitler, made room for Stauffenberg, who placed his briefcase under the table, as close to Hitler as possible, perhaps 6 feet away. He positioned it with the explosive charge facing Hitler. Stauffenberg then excused himself, claiming he needed to make an urgent phone call to Berlin. No one thought this unusual. As Chief of Staff of the Reserve Army, he often received urgent communications. As Stauffenberg left the room, another officer, Colonel Brandt, moved around the table to get a better view of the maps. His foot hit Stauffenberg's briefcase. Annoyed, Brandt picked it up and moved it to the far side of a heavy oak table leg, away from Hitler. This single action would save Hitler's life. Stauffenberg reached a bunker approximately 200 yards away. Haifton was waiting with a staff car. They checked their watches. 12:42 p.m. Any second now. At 12:42 p.m. and 30 seconds, the bomb detonated. The explosion tore through the wooden conference room. The blast shattered windows, blew off the roof, collapsed one wall. A massive fireball and cloud of smoke erupted. Papers, debris, and body parts flew through the air. Stauffenberg, watching from a distance, saw the explosion and was certain no one could have survived. He and Haifton immediately drove toward the airfield, passing through 3 security checkpoints by claiming they had permission from General Fromm to leave. Their plane took off at approximately 1:00 p.m. As they flew toward Berlin, Stauffenberg believed Hitler was dead. He believed Operation Valkyrie was about to succeed. He believed Germany would be saved. He was wrong on all counts. Biyasker Part 8. Hitler survives. Inside the destroyed conference room, the scene was chaotic. 4 men had been killed by the blast. Colonel Brandt, ironically the man who moved the briefcase, General Günther Korten, General Rudolf Schmundt, and Hitler's stenographer Heinrich Berger. Several others were seriously injured, but Hitler, protected by the heavy oak table leg that Brandt had inadvertently placed between him and the bomb, survived. His right arm was injured, his hair was singed, his eardrums were damaged, and his trousers were shredded. But he was alive, and after the initial shock, functional. Within minutes, Hitler was being examined by his personal physician. Within 15 minutes, he was making phone calls. Within 30 minutes, he was receiving visitors and assuring them he had survived an assassination attempt. "Providence has spared me," Hitler told his secretary. "This confirms I am destined to complete my mission for Germany." The realization that this was an assassination attempt came quickly. The destroyed briefcase was found. Officers who had been in the room confirmed Stauffenberg had placed it there and left just before the explosion. Orders went out immediately. Find Stauffenberg, arrest him, lock down Berlin. But there was a problem with the lockdown order. It conflicted with another set of orders that were simultaneously being issued from Berlin. Operation Valkyrie was being activated. Part 9. Valkyrie activated. Stauffenberg's plane landed in Berlin at approximately 4 p.m. He immediately went to the Bendler Block, the Reserve Army headquarters where the coup was supposed to be coordinated. What he found was chaos. General Friedrich Olbricht had activated Valkyrie around 4 p.m., issuing orders to Reserve Army units to seize control of government buildings and arrest SS officers. But many officers who received these orders were confused. Some had heard rumors that Hitler had survived. Some didn't know if the orders were legitimate. Stauffenberg immediately began working to clarify the situation. "Hitler is dead," he insisted to every officer he encountered. "I saw the explosion. No one could have survived. The SS is spreading rumors that he's alive to maintain control. We must move quickly." For the next few hours, Stauffenberg, Olbricht, and General Beck worked frantically to execute the coup. They sent teleprinter messages to military districts across Germany and occupied Europe, claiming the SS had attempted a coup and ordering the arrest of SS officers, dispatched officers to secure key Berlin locations, made phone calls to military commanders urging them to support the new government, attempted to arrest Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister. In some places, it briefly worked. In Paris, the military commander actually arrested the SS and Gestapo leadership, holding them for several hours. In Vienna, some SS officers were detained. Military units in several cities moved to secure government buildings. But then came the phone call that ended everything. Part 10. The collapse. At approximately 6:30 p.m., General Fromm, commander of the Reserve Army, and Stauffenberg's superior, received a phone call directly from the Wolf's Lair, It was Field Marshal Keitel, Hitler's chief of staff. From what's happening in Berlin, we're receiving reports of military units mobilizing. I don't know, Fromm replied carefully. He suspected what was happening. He had been approached by conspirators months earlier, but had refused to join while not actively opposing them. Well, I need to tell you something, Keitel said. There was an assassination attempt on the Führer this afternoon, but he survived. He's alive and uninjured. He will speak on the radio shortly to prove it. Fromm hung up and immediately confronted Stauffenberg. Hitler is alive. Keitel just told me. He survived the bomb. That's impossible, Stauffenberg insisted. I saw the explosion. No one. He's alive, Fromm repeated, which means this coup is over, and we're all guilty of treason. Fromm tried to arrest the conspirators immediately, but other officers in the Bendler bloc, still loyal to Stauffenberg, arrested Fromm instead. For a few hours, it was unclear who was actually in control of Reserve Army headquarters. By 8 p.m., radio stations began broadcasting an announcement. Hitler would address the nation at 1 a.m. to prove he had survived. With that announcement, the coup collapsed. Officers who had been following Valkyrie orders suddenly realized they had been participating in a failed coup. Units that had mobilized stood down. SS officers who had been arrested were released. At the Bendler bloc, junior officers who had remained loyal to Hitler organized a counter-coup. They freed General Fromm and arrested the conspirators. Part 11. The Executions. General Fromm knew he was in a precarious position. He had been approached by the conspirators and hadn't reported them. That alone was enough to implicate him. His only chance of survival was to demonstrate absolute loyalty by punishing the traitors immediately and severely. At approximately 11 p.m. on July 20th, Fromm convened an impromptu court-martial in his office. The trial lasted perhaps 10 minutes. Klaus von Stauffenberg, Friedrich Olbricht, Werner von Haaften, Albrecht Merz von Quernheim, you are guilty of treason against the Reich. I sentence you to death by firing squad, to be carried out immediately. You can't, Stauffenberg began. I can and I have, Fromm interrupted. Take them to the courtyard. General Beck, as a former chief of the General Staff, was granted the honor of shooting himself. He tried twice but failed to die immediately. An officer finally shot him to end his suffering. The 4 other conspirators were taken to the Bendler bloc courtyard, where a makeshift firing squad had been assembled. It was now after midnight, technically July 21st. The executions were carried out by the light of a staff car's headlights. Olbricht was shot first, then Haaften, then Merz von Quernheim. Stauffenberg was last. As he stood before the firing squad, he shouted, "Long live sacred Germany!" The rifles fired. Stauffenberg fell. The July 20th plot was over. At 1 a.m., Hitler's voice came over German radio, confirming his survival and vowing revenge against the small clique of ambitious, wicked, and stupidly criminal officers. Chapter 3. The Aftermath. Part 12. The Purge. Hitler's revenge was swift, brutal, and comprehensive. He had survived an assassination attempt by his own officers. Now he would ensure it never happened again. The investigation, led by the Gestapo and SS, quickly expanded beyond the immediate conspirators. Anyone who had been in contact with Stauffenberg or the other plotters was suspect. Anyone who had expressed doubts about the war was suspect. Anyone who had been slow to condemn the coup attempt was suspect. Over the following months, approximately 7,000 people were arrested. Of these, about 4,980 were executed. The purge consumed military officers, generals, colonels, majors, anyone connected to the conspiracy, Abwehr personnel, Admiral Canaris, Hans Oster, Hans von Dohnanyi, and dozens of intelligence officers, civilians, lawyers, diplomats, clergy, anyone in the resistance network, family members, under Sippenhaft, blood guilt, relatives of conspirators were also arrested. The executions were designed to be as humiliating and painful as possible. Hitler ordered that the main conspirators be hung on meat hooks with piano wire, dying slowly by strangulation. The executions were filmed so Hitler could watch them later. Admiral Canaris, the enigmatic Abwehr chief, was arrested in July 1944, but not executed until April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. He was hung naked at Flossenburg concentration camp, along with Hans Oster and others from the Abwehr resistance network. Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran minister who had used church connections for the resistance, was also executed at Flossenburg on April 9th. His last words were, "This is the end. For me, the beginning of life." Part 13. The Survivor's Testimony. Captain Herman Maas, the intelligence officer in Brussels who had been entrusted with documenting the resistance, watched the coup collapse from Belgium. When news came of mass arrests, he knew he had limited time. Maas made contact with Belgian resistance groups. "I need to get to Allied lines," he told them. "I have documents that prove German officers tried to stop Hitler. History needs to know this." The Belgian resistance arranged his escape. In August 1944, as Allied forces were advancing after D-Day, Maas crossed into liberated territory and surrendered to American forces. "I am Captain Herman Maas of the German Abwehr," he told his shocked captors. "I am a defector, and I have evidence of German military resistance to Hitler that your governments need to see." Maas was taken to intelligence officers, where he presented Dohnanyi's package, hundreds of documents proving the existence of a widespread military conspiracy against Hitler, evidence of systematic war crimes that German officers had documented, communications between resistance leaders and Allied governments, plans for post-Hitler Germany. The Allied intelligence officers were skeptical at first. German defectors often brought false information, but as Maas's documents were verified, their significance became clear. "Why are you telling us this?" one American intelligence officer asked. "Because the world needs to know," Maas replied, "that not all Germans were Nazis, that some of us tried to stop this madness, that we failed, yes, but we tried, and others should know that resistance is possible, even in the darkest circumstances." Maas spent the remainder of the war in protective custody, being debriefed by Allied intelligence. His testimony and documents were used in post-war trials and historical documentation. Part 14. The Question of Loyalty. After the war, the legacy of the July 20th conspirators was controversial in Germany itself. Were they heroes or traitors? Some Germans, particularly those who had suffered under Nazi rule, saw them as heroes, men who had tried to save Germany from Hitler's destructive policies, but others, especially former soldiers, saw them as traitors who had violated their oaths and stabbed Germany in the back during war. This view was particularly common in the immediate post-war years, when many Germans were still processing defeat and looking for someone to blame. The debate crystallized around a fundamental question: is it treasonous to betray a treasonous regime? The conspirators had violated their military oaths. They had plotted to kill their commander-in-chief during wartime. By any military standard, this was treason, but that commander-in-chief had started a war of conquest, had ordered genocide, had led Germany towards certain destruction. Was loyalty to such a leader actually loyalty to Germany? Or was opposing him the true loyalty? Henning von Treschow, one of the key conspirators who committed suicide when the plot failed, had written a letter addressing this question. "The worth of a man is certain only if he is prepared to sacrifice his life for his convictions. The assassination must be attempted at all costs. Even should it fail, the attempt must be made. The point now is not whether the coup has any practical purpose, but to prove to the world and before history that German resistance dared the decisive stroke. Compared to this, everything else is a side issue." Treschow understood that even if the coup failed militarily, it had moral significance. It proved that Germans had resisted. It challenged the post-war narrative that all Germans had been complicit. Part 15. The Rehabilitation. It took decades for the July 20th conspirators to be fully rehabilitated in German memory. The turning point came in the 1950s and 1960s as West Germany grappled with its Nazi past. In 1952, the Bendler Block, where Stauffenberg and others had been executed, was made into a memorial site. In 1955, a street in Berlin was renamed Stauffenbergstrasse. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy mentioned the July 20th plotters in a speech in Berlin, calling them a tragic and defiant testimony to the courage of free men. The German military, initially resistant to honoring men who had violated military oaths, slowly changed its position. In 1961, the Bundeswehr, West German military, dedicated its largest barracks to the July 20th conspirators. In 1980, the motto of the Bundeswehr's chaplain corps was changed to honor those who followed their conscience, a direct reference to the resistors. Today, the July 20th plotters are considered heroes in Germany. Their story is taught in schools. Streets, schools, and military installations bear their names. The moral complexity of their actions, that sometimes loyalty requires disobedience, is held up as an example. But this rehabilitation came too late for many of the survivors and family members who had suffered under Sippenhaft. Stauffenberg's widow Nina lived until 2006, but spent decades fighting for recognition of her husband's legacy. Many family members of the executed spent years in concentration camps or under suspicion. Part 16. The Wider Resistance. The July 20th plot was the most famous act of German resistance, but it wasn't the only one. Throughout the Nazi period, Germans from various backgrounds resisted. The White Rose. Students at Munich University who distributed anti-Nazi pamphlets. Leaders Hans and Sophie Scholl were executed in 1943. The Red Orchestra. Communist resistance network providing intelligence to the Soviets. Over 400 members were arrested. Many executed. Confessing Church. Protestant clergy who opposed Nazi religious policies. Many were imprisoned or killed. Kreisau Circle. Aristocrats and intellectuals planning post-Nazi Germany. Several members were executed after July 20th. Edelweiss Pirates. Working-class youth who refused Hitler Youth membership and helped Jews escape. Individual acts. Countless Germans who hid Jews, helped resistance members, sabotaged production, or simply refused to participate in atrocities. These resistors came from all classes and political backgrounds. They risked, and often lost, their lives. Their existence challenges the post-war narrative that ordinary Germans had no choice but to obey. Part 17. The Moral Legacy. The story of the German resistance raises profound moral questions that remain relevant today. When is disobedience a duty? The plotters violated their oaths because they believed those oaths had been made to an illegitimate regime. When does loyalty to humanity outweigh loyalty to country? Is unsuccessful resistance still meaningful? The July 20th plot failed. Hitler survived. The war continued. Yet the act itself had moral weight. It proved resistance was possible. How do we judge moral courage in complex situations? Many of the resistors had initially supported the Nazi regime. Some had participated in military actions in the war's early years. Does their eventual resistance redeem those earlier actions? What is the responsibility of those who know? The conspirators knew about atrocities while many Germans claimed ignorance. Did their knowledge create a special obligation to act? These questions don't have simple answers, but they're important questions. The German resistance shows us that even in totalitarian systems, moral choice remains possible. Difficult, dangerous, often fatal, but possible. Berbent Epilogue. Remembering the resistance today. In the courtyard of the Bendler Block in Berlin, there is a simple memorial. A bronze plaque marks the spot where Stauffenberg and the other conspirators were executed on the night of July 20th, 1944. Every year, on July 20th, Germany's political and military leaders gather there to lay wreaths and remember. The ceremony is a reminder that a nation must grapple with its darkest moments to move forward. In 2019, German Chancellor Angela Merkel gave a speech at the memorial. She said, "The men and women of the resistance remind us that even when all seems lost, when tyranny seems absolute, we still have choices. We can resist. We can say no. And that act of resistance, even if it fails, plants seeds that will grow in future generations." The story of the German resistance isn't just German history. It's human history. It's about the eternal struggle between conscience and obedience, between courage and comfort, between moral clarity and moral compromise. Klaus von Stauffenberg and his fellow conspirators knew they would likely fail. They knew they would probably die. They knew history might judge them harshly. They acted anyway. That's not just heroism. That's moral courage in its purest form. And their legacy isn't just that they tried to kill Hitler. Their legacy is the reminder that in any system, no matter how totalitarian, resistance is possible. Conscience can survive. Humanity can endure. They proved that even in the heart of the Nazi regime, Germans existed who chose humanity over ideology, who chose moral law over military law, who chose conscience over convenience. They failed to change the course of the war, but they succeeded in proving that failure to resist is always a choice, and therefore resistance is always possible. That's a lesson worth remembering, not just about World War II, not just about Germany, but about any time, any place where power demands we compromise our conscience. The men and women of the German resistance made a different choice. They chose to resist, and for that, they deserve to be remembered not as traitors to their country, but as patriots to humanity itself. End. Historical note. This account is based on extensive historical documentation of the July 20th, 1944 plot and the wider German resistance to Nazi rule. While some dialogue and minor details have been dramatized for narrative purposes, The main events, persons, and outcomes are historically accurate. The German resistance was real, substantial, and tragic. Thousands gave their lives trying to stop Hitler from within. Their story is complex. Many had initially supported the regime, some had participated in the war effort, all struggled with the moral implications of armed resistance against their own government. We honor their memory not by simplifying their story, but by grappling with its complexity. They were imperfect people making impossible moral choices in extraordinary circumstances. They deserve our respect not because they were perfect, but because they chose to act when others chose complicity. Did this story change your perspective? If this untold story of German resistance moved you, subscribe for more hidden history, hit like, and share with others who should know this. Comment: why isn't this story taught more widely? Turn on notifications for more incredible true stories of courage.